The blizzard hit Kennewick, Washington territory with such ferocity that Brenna Ashford wondered if God himself had forgotten this corner of the world. And as she pressed her gloved hands against the frosted window of the general store, watching the white curtain swallow everything beyond 10 feet, she felt certain that she too had become invisible in this frozen landscape. The winter of 1878 had arrived early and brutal, transforming the dusty cattle town into something unrecognizable. And Brenna had learned over her 22 years that winter was when people stopped seeing her altogether, when they looked through her, as if she were made of the same ice that clung to the eaves and windowsills. She turned from the window, her breath forming small clouds in the unheated back room where Mr. Peterson kept his inventory. The old store owner had hired her 3 months ago, just before the first snow, and she suspected it was partly out of charity and partly because no one else would work for the pittance he offered. Brenna didn't mind. She had learned not to expect much from life, not after her parents died in a wagon accident when she was 17, not after her aunt and uncle took her in only to make it clear she was a burden they tolerated rather than welcomed. At 22, she had her own small room above the saloon, paid for with her meager wages, and she told herself that independence was worth the loneliness that gnawed at her bones more painfully than any cold. The bell above the front door chimed, and Brenna hurried out from the back room, smoothing her worn brown skirt and adjusting the shawl around her shoulders. She expected to see one of the regular customers, perhaps Mrs. Henderson coming for more lamp oil, or young Tommy Brennan sent by his mother for flour. Instead, a man stood in the doorway, snow clinging to his dark coat and the wide brim of his hat, his boots leaving puddles on the wooden floor. Brenner recognized him immediately. Everyone in Kennewick knew Zachary Kane, the foreman of the Double K ranch that sprawled across the hills east of town. He was 25, tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair that curled slightly at his collar and eyes the color of storm clouds. Women whispered about him at church socials, giggled behind their fans at the occasional town dance. But Zachary Kane had never shown interest in any of them as far as Brenna could tell. He was always polite, always respectful, but distant in the way that suggested his mind was constantly occupied with matters more important than courtship. "Miss Ashford," he said, touching the brim of his hat in greeting. Snow scattered from the gesture, melting almost instantly on the warmer floor. "I hope I'm not coming too late. I know Peterson usually closes up early when the weather turns." "We're still open for another hour," Brenna replied, clasping her hands in front of her to stop them from trembling. She told herself it was from the cold, not from the way his eyes seemed to actually see her, to focus on her face with an intensity that made her heart skip. "What can I help you find?" "I need supplies for the ranch. We're expecting this storm to last a few days at least, maybe longer, and we're running low on coffee, flour, and sugar." He pulled a folded piece of paper from his coat pocket and held it out to her. "I wrote down everything we need. The boss wants to make sure the men are well fed. Cold work requires hot meals." Brenna took the list, her fingers briefly brushing against his gloved hand. Even through the leather, she felt a warmth that startled her. She forced herself to focus on the paper, reading through the items written in neat, careful handwriting. It was a substantial order, enough to keep her busy for at least half an hour gathering everything. "This will take me some time to put together," she said, looking up at him. "You're welcome to wait by the stove. It's not much, but it's warmer than standing in the draft from the door." "I appreciate that." Zachary moved toward the pot-bellied stove in the corner, removing his hat and running a hand through his damp hair. "Truth be told, I can barely feel my fingers. The ride into town was rougher than I expected." Brenna began pulling items from the shelves, loading a large crate with sacks of flour and sugar, tins of coffee, dried beans, and salt pork. She worked efficiently, years of practice making her movements quick and sure. But she was acutely aware of Zachary's presence, of the way he occasionally glanced in her direction, of the sound of his boots shifting on the floorboards. "You rode all the way from the Double K in this weather?" she asked, surprising herself with the question. She usually kept conversations with customers brief and professional, afraid that too much familiarity would remind them she was just the orphaned Ashford girl with no prospects and no family worth mentioning. Didn't have much choice. "We needed these supplies, and I'm the only one who knows the trail well enough to make it in a blizzard." He stepped closer, watching as she hefted a 50-pound sack of flour into the crate. "Here, let me help with that. That's too heavy for you to be lifting alone." "I manage just fine," Brenna said, but he was already beside her, his hands taking the weight of the next sack before she could protest further. Up close, she could smell the scent of leather and pine and something else, something distinctly masculine that made her pulse quicken. They worked in silence for a few minutes, Brenna gathering items and Zachary loading them into the crate. The storm howled outside, rattling the windows and making the whole building creak. Mr. Peterson emerged from his office in the back, took one look at the weather, and announced he was heading home before the roads became completely impassable. "Miss Ashford, lock up when you're done with Mr. Kane's order," he said, already pulling on his coat. "And be careful getting home yourself. This storm is only getting worse." After he left, the store felt smaller, more intimate. Brenna finished gathering the last items on Zachary's list, then tallied up the total in the ledger. He paid without questioning the amount, counting out bills from a leather wallet with the same careful precision he seemed to bring to everything he did. "That's quite a walk you have back to your room," Zachary said as she wrote out a receipt. "Above the saloon, right?" Brenna's hand stilled on the paper. "How did you know where I live?" He had the grace to look slightly embarrassed. "It's a small town. People talk. I didn't mean to seem like I was prying." "It's fine." She finished the receipt and handed it to him. "And yes, it's above the saloon. It's not far." "I'll be fine." "Not in this weather, you won't." He glanced toward the window, where the snow was falling so thick now that the buildings across the street were barely visible. "Let me walk you home after I load this crate onto my horse. It's not safe for anyone to be out alone in this." "You need to get back to the ranch," Brenna protested, even as a treacherous part of her heart leaped at the offer. "The trail will be even worse if you wait." "The trail is already impassable. I'm not fool enough to try riding back in this." "I'll be staying at the boarding house tonight and heading out at first light." He met her eyes with that steady, storm-gray gaze. "So I have time to make sure you get home safely." Brenna wanted to argue further, wanted to insist she didn't need help from anyone, especially not from Zachary Kane, who probably felt obligated to play the gentleman. But the truth was that the storm frightened her, and the walk to her room, though short, would be treacherous in this weather. So she simply nodded and began closing up the store, banking the fire in the stove and pulling the shades over the windows. Zachary made 2 trips to his horse, a sturdy bay gelding tied to the post outside, loading the crate and securing it with ropes. By the time he came back inside for the final time, Brenna had her cloak fastened and her scarf wrapped around her face, leaving only her eyes visible. She locked the door behind them, and they stepped out into the full fury of the blizzard. The wind hit her like a physical force, stealing her breath and making her stagger. Immediately, Zachary's arm came around her shoulders, steadying her, pulling her close against his side. She could feel the solid warmth of him even through their layers of clothing, could feel the strength in the way he guided her forward through the knee-deep snow. The walk that normally took 5 minutes stretched into 15. They couldn't see more than a few feet ahead, had to feel their way along the fronts of buildings, using them as guides. Twice, Brenna's foot caught on something buried in the snow, and both times Zachary's grip tightened, keeping her upright. She found herself grateful for his presence, grateful that she wasn't alone in this white wilderness that had swallowed the familiar streets of Kennewick. When they finally reached the saloon, the sound of piano music and rough laughter drifted out even through the closed doors and windows. Brenna led Zachary around to the side entrance, a narrow door that led to a steep staircase. Her room was at the top, a single small space with a bed, a dresser, a washstand, and a tiny stove that barely kept the chill at bay. "Thank you," she said when they reached the bottom of the stairs, turning to face him. Snow clung to both of them, transforming them into ghostly figures. "I would have made it, but I'm grateful I didn't have to try alone. I'm glad I could help." He didn't move away, didn't step back into the storm. In the dim light from the lamp she'd left burning in her window, his face was shadowed, but she could see the concern in his eyes. "Will you be warm enough up there? These rooms aren't known for their insulation." "I'll be fine. I have extra blankets, and the stove works well enough." She hesitated, then added, "You should get to the boarding house before the storm gets worse." "I should," he agreed, but still he didn't move. Something passed between them in that moment, something electric and alive that had nothing to do with the storm raging around them. "Miss Ashford, I hope you don't think I'm being too forward, but I've been meaning to speak with you for some time now." Brenna's heart began to hammer in her chest. "Speak with me about what?" "I come into Peterson's store every week, sometimes twice a week, and every time I find myself hoping you'll be there behind the counter." His voice was low, barely audible over the wind, but she heard every word with perfect clarity. "I tell myself it's because you're efficient and you know where everything is, but that's not really the truth." She couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. This wasn't happening. Men didn't notice her, didn't seek her out, especially not men like Zachary Kane, who could have his pick of any woman in the territory. "The truth is, you're the only one I see every day, even when I'm not in town," he continued. "I think about your smile when you hand me my purchases. I think about the way you bite your lip when you're adding up numbers. I think about how you work so hard, never complaining, never asking for help even when you clearly need it." "You don't know anything about me," Brenna managed to whisper, her voice shaking. "Then let me get to know you. Let me call on you properly if you're willing. Let me prove that I'm serious about this, about you." For a long moment, Brenna stared at him, searching his face for any sign of mockery or pity. She found neither. What she saw instead was hope, nervous and genuine, and something that might have been longing. It was that last that made her decision for her. "I'm willing," she said, and even through the scarf covering her face, he must have seen the smile in her eyes. His answering grin was like the sun breaking through clouds. "Then I'll come see you as soon as this storm passes, I promise. I'll be at the store, I'm always at the store." "I know." He reached out and gently adjusted her scarf, tucking it more securely around her face. "Stay warm, Brenna. That's the first time I've used your given name. It suits you." "Zachary," she said, testing his name on her tongue, liking the way it felt. "Be safe getting to the boarding house. It's just 2 buildings down, I think I'll manage." He touched his hat brim one more time, then turned and disappeared into the swirling snow, his dark form swallowed almost immediately by the white. Brenna climbed the stairs to her room in a daze, her cold fingers fumbling with the key. Once inside, she leaned against the closed door, her heart racing. She couldn't quite believe what had just happened. Zachary Kane, The man every woman in Kennewick watched with appreciative eyes had just asked to court her. He had said she was the only one he saw every day. He had said he thought about her smile. She moved to the window, looking down at the street below, but he was already gone, lost in the storm. The blizzard continued its assault on the town, piling snow against buildings, turning everything familiar into something strange and otherworldly. But for the first time since winter began, Brenna didn't feel invisible. For the first time in longer than she could remember, she felt seen. The storm raged for 3 days straight. Brenna made it to the store each morning, though the walk became increasingly difficult as the snow piled higher. Mr. Peterson arrived late on the second day, and didn't come at all on the third. The few customers who braved the weather were mostly men who needed tobacco or whiskey, their faces red and wind-burned, their expressions grateful for the warmth of the store even if it wasn't much warmer than outside. Zachary didn't come. Brenna told herself she hadn't expected him to, that no one could travel from the Double K to town in this weather, that he was probably snowed in at the ranch rather than at the boarding house. But disappointment still gnawed at her, whispering the familiar refrain that she had imagined the whole thing, that men like him didn't really notice women like her, that winter had made her invisible after all. On the fourth day, the snow stopped. The silence was almost eerie after the constant howl of wind. Brenna woke to pale sunlight streaming through her small window, and when she looked outside, she saw a world transformed. Kennewick was buried under at least 3 feet of snow, the streets impassable, except for a few narrow paths that ambitious early risers had already begun to shovel. The sky was a hard, bright blue, the kind of blue that hurt to look at, and the air had the sharp, brittle quality that came with temperatures far below freezing. She dressed in her warmest clothes and made her way down to the street. The saloon owner, a gruff man named Murphy, was shoveling the walk in front of his establishment, and he grunted a greeting as she passed. Other townspeople were emerging from their homes and businesses, assessing the damage, beginning the work of digging out. The storm had left Kennewick beautiful but paralyzed, a frozen tableau that would take days to clear. At the store, Brenna found Mr. Peterson already inside, stoking the fire in the stove. He looked older than usual, his face drawn with worry. "Glad you made it, Miss Ashford. I wasn't sure if you'd try coming in today." He rubbed his hands together over the growing flames. "We need to take inventory. I'm afraid some folks might be running low on supplies after 3 days of this, and we need to know what we have to offer." They spent the morning counting stock, making lists, organizing. A steady stream of customers arrived, many buying more than usual, stocking up in case another storm hit. Brenna was kept busy, so busy that she barely had time to think, which was probably a blessing. But every time the bell above the door chimed, her heart leaped, hoping to see a tall man with storm-gray eyes. It wasn't until late afternoon, when the sun was already beginning its descent, and the temperature was dropping even further, that Zachary finally walked through the door. He looked tired, his face shadowed with several days' growth of beard, his clothes bearing the marks of hard travel. But his eyes lit up when they found her behind the counter, and Brenna felt her own face flush with pleasure. "I was beginning to think you'd forgotten," she said, then immediately regretted the words. She sounded needy, desperate, all the things she had promised herself she wouldn't be. Not possible. He approached the counter, pulling off his gloves. "I'm sorry it took so long. The trail from the ranch is still rough, and I had to make sure everything was secure before I left. We lost part of the barn roof in the storm, and 2 of our best horses got spooked and broke through a fence. It's been chaos. I shouldn't have said anything. You don't owe me explanations." She busied herself straightening already straight items on the counter, unable to meet his eyes. "Brenna, look at me." His voice was gentle but firm, and she couldn't help but obey. "I meant what I said before the storm. I want to court you properly. That means I want you to expect things from me. I want you to be disappointed if I don't show up when I say I will, because that means you're starting to care." "I don't know how to do this," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I've never been courted. I don't know what to expect or how to act or what the rules are." "Then we'll figure it out together." He glanced around the store, noting the other customers browsing the aisles, then lowered his voice. "When do you finish work today?" 6 o'clock. "Mr. Peterson closes up then. May I walk you home? And perhaps we could have supper together at the hotel dining room. It's not fancy, but the food is decent, and it's warm." The offer was so unexpected, so normal and yet so extraordinary that Brenna could only nod. She had eaten in her room every night for months, bread and cheese and occasionally a bit of stew from the saloon downstairs. The idea of sitting in the hotel dining room like a regular person, like someone who mattered, was both thrilling and terrifying. "I'll come back at 6, Zachary promised. "I need to check on my horse and send a message back to the ranch, but I'll be here." He was true to his word. At precisely 6 o'clock, as Brenna was buttoning her cloak and Mr. Peterson was counting the day's receipts, Zachary appeared. He had cleaned up, shaved, changed into fresh clothes. He looked every inch the respectable ranch foreman, and Brenna felt suddenly shabby in her worn cloak and patched skirt. But if Zachary noticed her threadbare appearance, he gave no sign. He simply offered his arm, and she took it, feeling the solid strength of him beneath her gloved hand. They walked slowly through the snowy streets, following the paths that had been shoveled through the drifts. The evening was bitterly cold, their breath forming clouds in the air, but Brenna barely noticed. She was too aware of the man beside her, of the way other people glanced at them with curiosity and speculation. The hotel dining room was warm and bright, lit by oil lamps and heated by a large fireplace. The proprietress, a cheerful woman named Mrs. Dalton, showed them to a small table near the window. The menu was simple: beef stew, roast chicken, or pork chops, all served with potatoes and bread. Zachary ordered the stew for both of them and coffee that came thick and dark and wonderfully hot. "Tell me about yourself," Zachary said once Mrs. Dalton had bustled away to the kitchen. "I know the basics, what everyone knows, but I want to hear it from you." So Brenna told him, haltingly at first, then with growing ease. She told him about her parents, about the wagon accident that killed them on a bright summer day when she was 17. She told him about her aunt and uncle, about the 2 years she lived with them, feeling like an unwelcome guest in their home. She told him about leaving, about finding work at the store, about the small room that was the first place she'd ever been able to call her own. "I'm not interesting," she finished, embarrassed by how plain her story sounded. "I work, I sleep, I work some more. That's all there is to me." "That's not all there is to you," Zachary said firmly. "You're strong, you're independent. You didn't let circumstances break you, even when it would have been easier to give up. That's not nothing, Brenna. That's everything." Their stew arrived and they ate while Zachary told her about his own life. He had grown up in Nevada, the youngest of 4 brothers. His father had been a prospector who spent more time chasing silver dreams than raising his family. So Zachary's mother had worked herself to exhaustion keeping them fed and clothed. When she died, Zachary was 16, and his father had already drunk himself to death a year earlier. His brothers scattered, seeking their fortunes in different territories, but Zachary had headed north to Washington Territory, drawn by stories of good ranch land and opportunities for men willing to work hard. "I started as a wrangler on the Double K," The lowest position there is," he said. "But Mr. Kimball, the owner, he's a fair man. He saw that I wasn't afraid of hard work, and he promoted me to foreman 3 years ago. I've been saving my wages, planning for the future." "What kind of future?" Brenna asked, caught up in the way his eyes grew distant as if he could see something she couldn't. "My own ranch someday. Nothing as big as the Double K, but enough. Good grazing land, water rights, a herd of my own. A home." He looked at her then, his expression serious. "A family, if I'm lucky enough to find the right woman." The implication hung in the air between them, and Brenna's cheeks grew hot. She looked down at her stew, her heart pounding so loudly she was sure he must hear it. They talked for 2 hours, until the dining room began to empty and Mrs. Dalton started giving them pointed looks. Zachary paid for their meal over Brenna's protests, then walked her home through the frozen streets. The saloon was in full swing when they arrived, music and laughter spilling out into the night, but the side entrance was quiet and dark. "Thank you for supper," Brenna said, reluctant to see the evening end. "I had a wonderful time. So did I." Zachary reached out and took her hand, his grip warm even through their gloves. "May I see you again, soon? I'd like that. Tomorrow I could meet you after work." "Tomorrow," she agreed, smiling up at him. He lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles that she felt even through the thick wool of her glove. Then he was gone, striding away into the darkness, and Brenna was climbing the stairs to her room with her heart singing. The next weeks fell into a pattern that Brenna had never imagined possible. Zachary came to town every few days, sometimes on ranch business, sometimes simply to see her. They took walks when the weather permitted, had supper at the hotel dining room, sat by her small stove drinking tea and talking until late into the night. He told her about his dreams for his future ranch, about the challenges of managing men and cattle, about the beauty of sunrise over the Columbia River. She told him about the books she borrowed from the church library, about her secret talent for drawing, about the small pleasures she found in her quiet life. With each meeting, each conversation, Brenna felt herself falling deeper. She loved the way Zachary listened, truly listened, as if her words mattered. She loved his quiet strength, the way he never raised his voice or lost his temper. She loved his hands, calloused and work-roughened, and the gentle way he helped her over icy patches on the sidewalk. She loved his rare smiles, the way they transformed his serious face into something boyish and beautiful, but with the growing love came growing fear. Brenna had learned early not to trust happiness, not to believe that good things would last. Every time Zachary left, she wondered if this would be the time he wouldn't return, if he would realize that the orphan store clerk wasn't worth his time after all. The winter seemed to amplify these fears, the long dark nights and bitter cold making her feel small and insignificant. It was late January when everything changed. Zachary had been away for over a week, kept at the ranch by a series of problems that required the foreman's attention. A storm had damaged more buildings, several cattle had fallen through ice on a pond, and Mr. Kimball himself had come down with pneumonia, leaving much of the decision-making to Zachary. Brenna understood, or tried to, but each day without seeing him felt longer than the last. When he finally appeared at the store, it was late afternoon and the light outside was already fading. Brenna was helping Mrs. Henderson select fabric when the bell chimed, and she looked up to see Zachary standing in the doorway. Her heart leaped at the sight of him, but her smile froze when she registered his expression. Something was wrong. "I'll just take this one," Mrs. Henderson said, sensing the sudden tension. She quickly paid for her purchase and hurried out, leaving Brenna and Zachary alone in the store. Mr. Peterson had left early for a doctor's appointment, so there was no one else to overhear. "What's happened?" Brenna asked, moving toward him. "Is Mr. Kimball worse?" "He's recovering, actually." Zachary removed his hat, running a hand through his hair in a gesture she recognized as uncertainty. "But he's decided to make some changes at the ranch. He's getting older and the pneumonia scared him. He's talking about selling off part of the herd, reducing operations." "I don't understand." "What does that mean for you?" "It means I need to make a decision sooner than I planned. I've been offered a position at a ranch in Montana, a bigger operation with better pay. Or I could stay at the Double K with reduced responsibilities and reduced wages. Or—" He paused, his gray eyes searching her face. "Or I could take the money I've saved and buy that land I've been looking at, the 100 acres about 10 miles north of here. It's good land, Brenna. There's water, grazing, timber. It's enough to start with." "That's wonderful," Brenna said, trying to inject enthusiasm into her voice even as her heart sank. If he bought land, he would be busy building, establishing his ranch. He would have even less time to come to town, less time for her. Eventually, he would realize that courting her was an inconvenience he couldn't afford. "You should do it. It's what you've always wanted." "It is," he agreed, "but there's something else I want just as much, maybe more." He stepped closer, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. "I want you to marry me, Brenna." The words hung in the air between them, impossible and perfect. Brenna stared at him, certain she had misheard or misunderstood. "What? I know it's fast. I know we've only been courting for 6 weeks, but I'm sure about this about you. I love you." His voice was steady, certain, filled with a conviction that left no room for doubt. "I love your strength and your kindness and the way you bite your lip when you're nervous. I love how you never complain even when you have every right to. I love the way you look at the world, finding beauty in small things. I want to build my life with you. I want to wake up beside you every morning and fall asleep with you in my arms every night. I want children with you, a home with you, everything with you." Tears were streaming down Brenna's face, and she made no effort to wipe them away. "I'm nobody. I have nothing to bring to a marriage. No dowry, no connections, no family. I'm just the orphan store clerk everyone pities." "You're everything," Zachary said fiercely. He took her face in his hands, his thumbs gently brushing away her tears. "You're everything I didn't know I was looking for. And for the record, I don't pity you. I admire you more than anyone I've ever met. You've survived things that would have broken lesser people, and you did it with grace and dignity. That's who you are, Brenna. Not the orphan store clerk. Not some charity case. You're the strongest, bravest woman I know, and I would be honored if you'd agree to be my wife." "I love you," Brenna whispered, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. "I've been so afraid to say it, so afraid to believe this was real, but I love you, Zachary. I love you so much it terrifies me." His smile was brilliant, transforming his entire face. "Then say yes. Say you'll marry me. Say you'll take a chance on building something together." "Yes." The word came out as half sob, half laugh. "Yes, I'll marry you." He kissed her then, right there in the middle of Peterson's general store, a kiss that was tender and passionate and full of promise. Brenna melted into him, her hands clutching his coat, her heart soaring higher than she'd ever thought possible. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, she felt transformed, as if she had shed some old, worn-out skin and emerged into something new and glorious. "We should tell Mr. Peterson tomorrow," Zachary said, still holding her close. "And then we need to make plans. I'll buy the land, start building a house. We can be married in the spring, as soon as the weather clears enough for a proper ceremony." "Spring," Brenner repeated, tasting the word. After so many long, dark, lonely winters, the promise of spring felt like a miracle. They spent the rest of the evening making plans. their voices excited and their words tumbling over each other. Zachary described the land, painting pictures with his words of rolling hills and stands of pine, of a creek that ran year-round and meadows perfect for cattle. Brenna listened, trying to imagine herself in this place, trying to see the house they would build together, the life they would create. "I should let you get some rest," Zachary said reluctantly when the clock struck 9, "but I want to kiss you one more time before I go." He did, a long, slow kiss that made Brenna's toes curl in her boots. When he finally pulled away, she was dizzy with happiness and desire, and 1,000 other emotions she couldn't name. "I'll come by tomorrow morning," he promised. "We'll talk to Peterson together, give him notice that you'll be leaving in the spring." After he left, Brenna climbed the stairs to her room in a daze. She stood by the window, looking out at the frozen town below, but for once she didn't see the cold or the darkness. She saw spring and summer and a future that glowed with possibility. She saw herself as Zachary saw her, not invisible, not insignificant, but precious and loved and essential. The engagement caused quite a stir in Kennewick. Mr. Peterson was genuinely happy for her, though concerned about finding a replacement. The other store customers offered congratulations, some sincere, some tinged with the faint surprise that quiet Brenna Ashford had managed to catch the attention of Zachary Kane. Mrs. Henderson, more direct than most, said what many were likely thinking. "Well, you're a lucky girl," she said one afternoon while browsing through ribbons. "Though I suppose he's lucky too, getting a wife who knows the value of hard work and isn't afraid of it." Brenna chose to take it as a compliment. She was too happy to let anyone's subtle condescension touch her. Zachary came to town whenever he could, and slowly, word spread about his purchase of the land north of town. Men who knew ranching offered advice. Suppliers presented him with quotes for lumber and tools. And suddenly, Zachary was not just the foreman of the Double K, but a man establishing his own operation, someone to be respected in his own right. In late February, Zachary took Brenna to see the land. It was a cold, clear day, perfect for riding. He had borrowed a gentle mare from the ranch for her, and she sat nervously in the saddle while he led them out of town and into the open country beyond. Brenna had never been much of a rider, but Zachary was patient, keeping the pace slow and steady, pointing out landmarks along the way. When they finally reached his property, Brenna understood why he had fallen in love with it. The land rolled gently, covered in winter brown grass that would turn green with spring. A stand of ponderosa pines marked the western edge, and the promised creek cut through the center, partially frozen but still flowing beneath the ice. To the east, she could see the distant shimmer of the Columbia River, and beyond that, the blue shadows of mountains. "What do you think?" Zachary asked, his voice anxious as he helped her dismount. "It's beautiful," Brenna breathed, turning in a slow circle to take it all in. "It's absolutely beautiful. The house will go here." He pointed to a slight rise about 100 yards from the creek. "Good drainage, a view in all directions, close to water but not so close we have to worry about flooding. I'm thinking 4 rooms to start, a kitchen, a sitting room, and 2 bedrooms. We can add on as we need to." "2 bedrooms?" Brenna asked, her cheeks warming despite the cold. "One for us, one for guests initially." His own face reddened. "Though I'm hoping eventually we'll need more rooms." "For children, I mean. If you want children." "I do," Brenna said softly. She had never let herself think much about children, about family, but now the idea bloomed in her mind, beautiful and terrifying. "I want everything with you, Zachary." He pulled her into his arms, holding her close while the wind whispered through the pines, and the winter sun shone pale and bright overhead. "I'm going to start building next week." Some of the men from the Double K have agreed to help in their spare time, and Mr. Kimball is being generous with letting me use ranch equipment. If everything goes according to plan, the house should be ready by late April. We could be married in May. May, Brenna repeated, savoring the word. May meant apple blossoms and longer days and the end of winter's grip. May meant the beginning of everything. They spent another hour walking the property, Zachary pointing out where he'd put the barn, the corrals, the pastures. He talked about the cattle he planned to buy, about breeding stock and market prices, and all the practical details of running a ranch. Brenna listened, fascinated by his knowledge and passion, by the way his whole face lit up when he talked about the future they would build together. When they finally rode back to town, the sun was setting, painting the snow-covered landscape in shades of pink and gold. Brenna's hands were numb with cold, and her backside ached from the unaccustomed hours in the saddle, but she had never felt more content. This was what happiness felt like, she realized. This certainty, this belonging, this sense of moving toward something good and right and meant to be. March arrived with a false thaw that turned the snow to slush and made the roads nearly impassable with mud. Then the temperature dropped again, freezing everything solid, creating treacherous conditions that kept most people close to home. But Zachary's work on the house continued, weather permitting. He and his crew of volunteers worked on the foundation, on framing walls, on the 100 tasks required to turn raw land into a home. Brenna saw less of him during these weeks, but she didn't mind as much as she'd feared she would. She knew he was working toward their future, and that knowledge sustained her through the long days at the store and the lonely evenings in her room. She spent her free time sewing, creating linens and curtains and a wedding dress from fabric she purchased with her carefully saved wages. Mrs. Henderson, in an unexpected gesture of kindness, taught her finer stitching techniques, helping her create a dress that was simple but beautiful, with delicate embroidery at the collar and cuffs. "You're glowing," Mr. Peterson said one morning in mid-March as they were opening the store. "Love suits you, Miss Ashford." Brenna ducked her head, pleased and embarrassed. "I'm happy, happier than I ever thought I could be." "You deserve it. You've worked hard and never asked for anything you didn't earn. I hope this Zachary Kane knows how lucky he is. He tells me he does. And I tell him how lucky I am. Maybe we're both right." The old man chuckled. "Maybe you are. Now, help me get these new canned goods sorted. Delivery came in yesterday while you were out and I made a mess of the organization." As winter slowly, grudgingly gave way to early spring, Brenna felt herself transforming. The woman who had felt invisible, who had believed winter made her disappear, was gone. In her place was someone confident, someone loved, someone with a future that stretched out bright and full of promise. She walked taller, smiled more freely, engaged in conversations with customers rather than keeping to her shy, silent service. One afternoon in late March, a stranger came into the store, a well-dressed woman of about 30 with sharp eyes and an appraising manner. She browsed for a few minutes before approaching the counter where Brenna was tallying receipts. "You must be Brenna Ashford," the woman said. "I've heard quite a bit about you. I'm afraid you have me at a disadvantage, madam. I don't believe we've met." "I'm Caroline Kimball, Mr. Kimball's daughter. I've been back east caring for my own family, but I returned last week when I heard my father had been ill." She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "I wanted to meet the woman who has apparently captured Zachary Kane's heart. He was always so devoted to the ranch. I couldn't imagine him being distracted by romance." Brenna felt a prickle of unease. There was something in Caroline's tone, in the way she emphasized certain words that suggested disapproval or mockery. "Zachary is devoted to his work, but he's also kind enough to spare time for me." Oh, I'm sure. And now he's leaving the Double K entirely, buying his own land, starting his own operation. My father is devastated, you know. He relied on Zachary so heavily. I can't help but wonder if this hasty engagement played a role in Zachary's decision to leave. I don't think you understand, Brenna said carefully, trying to keep her voice level. Zachary has wanted his own ranch for years. It's been his dream long before he and I met. Has he told you about Montana? About the offer he received? Much better pay, much bigger operation. A real opportunity for advancement, but I suppose he chose love over ambition. Caroline's smile sharpened. I do hope you're worth the sacrifice. Before Brenna could formulate a response, the bell over the door chimed and Zachary himself walked in. His expression brightened when he saw Brenna, then shuddered slightly when he noticed Caroline. Miss Kimball, I heard you were back. How is your father? Improving daily, thank you. I was just getting acquainted with your fiancée. She's quite different from what I expected. Caroline picked up her purchases, a few spools of thread and some buttons. I'll take these, please, Miss Ashford. Brenner rang up the sale with shaking hands, acutely aware of the tension in the small space. After Caroline left, the bell chiming sharply behind her, Zachary moved to the counter and took Brenna's hand. Don't let her get to you. Caroline has always been sharp-tongued, and she's protective of her father. She probably blames me for the changes at the ranch. Did you give up the Montana offer because of me? Brenna asked, needing to hear the truth. She made it sound like you sacrificed your ambitions for our engagement. I gave up Montana because I wanted to stay here in Washington Territory, where I can build something of my own, Zachary said firmly. Yes, you were part of that decision, but not because you held me back. Because you gave me a reason to put down roots, to stop wandering and start building. That's not a sacrifice, Brenna. That's the best decision I've ever made. His words soothed the anxiety Caroline had stirred up, but a small seed of doubt remained. What if he came to regret his choice? What if the ranch failed and he blamed her? What if she wasn't worth what he had given up? As if reading her thoughts, Zachary lifted her hand to his lips. Stop. Whatever you're thinking, stop. I love you, I chose you, and I would make the same choice 1,000 times over. I'm scared, she admitted in a whisper. I'm scared of losing you, scared of not being enough, scared that this happiness is too good to last. Then I'll just have to keep proving you wrong every single day for the rest of our lives. He smiled, that rare, beautiful smile that made her heart skip. Starting with asking you to come see the house this Sunday. It's nearly finished, and I want you to tell me what you think, what changes you want, what will make it feel like home to you. Sunday arrived clear and mild, one of those early spring days that hints at the warmth to come. Brenna borrowed a horse from the livery, more comfortable in the saddle now after her previous ride, and met Zachary on the road north of town. They rode together through country that looked entirely different from her last visit. The snow was almost gone except for lingering patches in the deepest shadows. The grass was greening, tiny wildflowers were beginning to bloom, and the creek ran full and noisy with snowmelt. When the house came into view, Brenna gasped. It was still rough, lacking paint and some finishing touches, but it was unmistakably a home. The walls were solid, the roof was shingled, windows gleamed in the sunlight, and a porch stretched across the front, perfect for sitting and watching the sunset. It was smaller than the grand homes in town, but to Brenna, it was the most beautiful building she had ever seen. Zachary helped her dismount, then led her inside. The room smelled of fresh cut wood and possibility. The kitchen had a good iron stove, a large table he'd built himself, and shelves ready for dishes and supplies. The sitting room had a fireplace made of river stone, with a mantel wide enough for photographs and mementos. The 2 bedrooms were off a short hallway, both with windows that let in generous light. "What do you think?" Zachary asked, watching her anxiously as she moved from room to room. "I think it's perfect," Brenna said, her voice thick with emotion. "I think you've built us a real home, Zachary. We still need furniture, curtains, a dozen other things, but the structure is solid. We could move in next month if you wanted." "Next month?" She turned to him, taking both his hands. "Let's get married in April instead of May. I don't want to wait any longer." His answering grin was answer enough. He pulled her close and kissed her, there in the middle of their empty sitting room, and Brenna felt something settle in her chest, some last piece of fear or doubt melting away. This was real. This was happening. This was her future, solid and certain as the walls around them. They set the date for April 20th. It would be a simple ceremony at the church in Kennewick, followed by a meal at the hotel for anyone who wanted to attend. Brenna gave Mr. Peterson her notice, agreeing to work through the first week of April to give him time to find and train a replacement. She packed her few belongings, sewed the finishing touches on her dress, and tried to contain the joy that kept bubbling up inside her. The night before the wedding, Brenna stood at her window one last time, looking down at the town that had been her home for 3 years. She thought about the woman she'd been when she first arrived, broken and lost, and convinced she would always be alone. She thought about all the winter days when she'd felt invisible, when she'd believed the cold made her disappear from the sight of others. But Zachary had seen her. Even in the deepest winter, even in the darkest cold, he had seen her and known her and loved her. And tomorrow, she would stand beside him and promise to spend the rest of her life loving him in return. It was more than she had ever dared to dream, and yet it was real as the spring breeze that whispered through her window, carrying the scent of apple blossoms and new beginnings. The wedding day dawned bright and beautiful, as if nature itself was celebrating. Brenna woke early in her small room, butterflies dancing in her stomach. Mrs. Henderson arrived to help her dress, fussing over every detail of the white gown they had created together. "You look lovely, dear," the older woman said, adjusting Brenna's simple veil. "That Zachary Kane won't know what hit him when he sees you." At the church, Brenna was surprised by the number of people who had gathered. It seemed like half the town had turned out, filling the pews and spilling out onto the front steps. Mr. Peterson waited to walk her down the aisle, a role he had volunteered for when Brenna mentioned she had no family to perform the duty. "Ready?" he asked, offering his arm. "Ready," she confirmed, her voice steady despite her racing heart. The church doors opened, and Brenna saw Zachary standing at the altar, looking impossibly handsome in his best suit. But it was his expression that made her breath catch the pure, undisguised love in his eyes, the way his face lit up when he saw her, as if she were the only person in the entire world. She walked toward him with her head high, no longer the invisible girl nobody noticed, but a woman cherished and chosen and loved beyond measure. The ceremony was brief but meaningful. They exchanged vows in front of the whole town, promising to love and honor and support each other through whatever life brought. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Zachary kissed her with such tenderness that Brenna felt tears slide down her cheeks. "I love you, Mrs. Kane," he whispered against her lips. "I love you too," she whispered back, testing out her new name and finding it perfect. The celebration at the hotel lasted hours. People toasted the newlyweds, shared stories, offered advice both useful and ridiculous. Even Caroline Kimball attended, though she said little beyond polite congratulations. Mr. Kimball himself had come, still weak from his illness, but insisting he wouldn't miss seeing his best foreman married. "You take care of her," he told Zachary gruffly, "and don't be a stranger." Just because you're starting your own place doesn't mean we can't be neighborly. I appreciate that, sir, and I'll never forget what you did for me, giving me a chance when I was nobody. You were never nobody, Kane. You just needed the opportunity to prove what you were made of. The old man's eyes twinkled. Looks like you found more than just land and cattle. You found yourself a good woman. As the sun began to set, Zachary and Brenna slipped away from the celebration. They rode together to their new home, Brenna sitting in front of Zachary on his horse, his arms secure around her. The evening was warm, the first truly warm day of spring, and the air smelled of earth and growing things. At the house, Zachary dismounted first, then lifted Brenna down, cradling her against his chest. "I'm supposed to carry you over the threshold," he said, his voice suddenly uncertain. "Is that something you'd want?" For answer, Brenna wrapped her arms around his neck and smiled. He carried her through the door and into their home, setting her gently on her feet in the middle of the sitting room. Candles were already lit, casting warm, flickering light over the new furniture they had gradually accumulated. Fresh flowers sat on the mantel, and a fire crackled in the hearth, making the space feel cozy and welcoming. "When did you do all this?" Brenna asked, turning in a slow circle to take in the thoughtful touches. "I came out early this morning. I wanted everything to be perfect for when I brought you home." He moved behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist and pulling her back against his chest. "Our home, Brenna. Ours." She leaned into him, feeling safe and cherished and desired in equal measure. "I never thought I could have this. I never thought anyone would want me the way you do. Then I'll spend every day reminding you." He turned her in his arms, his hands gentle on her face. "You're the most beautiful woman I've ever known, inside and out, and I'm the luckiest man alive to call you my wife." He kissed her then, deep and searching, and Brenna responded with all the love and passion that had been building inside her for months. They moved together to the bedroom, helping each other out of their wedding clothes with fumbling, eager hands. Zachary was patient and gentle, mindful that this was new territory for Brenna, making sure every touch brought pleasure rather than fear. When they finally came together, Brenna felt something shift inside her, some final barrier falling away. She was his completely, and he was hers, and the joining of their bodies felt like a sacred seal on the vows they had spoken earlier. Afterward, they lay tangled together under the quilts Brenna had sewn, talking softly about nothing and everything, reluctant to let sleep claim them and end the perfect day. The weeks that followed established the rhythms of their new life together. Zachary worked from dawn to dusk building his herd, repairing fences, clearing land. Brenna transformed the house into a true home, hanging curtains, planting a garden, learning to cook on the temperamental stove. They worked together in the cool mornings and warm evenings, side by side, building something that was entirely theirs. Neighbors began to stop by, curious about the newlyweds and the new ranch. Some offered help, some came seeking help, and slowly, Brenna and Zachary became part of the community of ranchers and farmers that dotted the land north of Kennewick. Brenna discovered she had a talent for hospitality, for making visitors feel welcome with hot coffee and fresh bread. She discovered she was stronger than she'd realized, capable of hard physical labor and quick decisions when circumstances demanded them. In May, a late frost threatened the valley. Brenna and Zachary spent a frantic night moving their small herd closer to shelter, building fires to warm the air, doing everything they could to protect the vulnerable calves. By morning, exhausted and covered in soot, they surveyed the damage and found they had lost only 2 animals, far fewer than many of their neighbors. "We make a good team," Zachary said, pulling Brenna into a tired embrace as the sun rose over their property. "I couldn't have done this without you." "Yes, you could have, but I'm glad you don't have to." She rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "I'm glad we're doing this together." Summer arrived hot and dry, turning the grass golden and the creek to a trickle. Zachary worried about water, about feed for the cattle, about whether they'd have enough to see the herd through the next winter. But the rains came in late August, soaking the parched earth and bringing relief. By September, the grass was green again, the cattle were thriving, and Zachary was beginning to talk about expanding the herd the following spring. It was in September that Brenna realized she was pregnant. She had suspected for a few weeks, her body changing in small but unmistakable ways, but she waited until she was certain before telling Zachary. She chose an evening when they were sitting on the porch watching the sunset, his arm around her shoulders, both of them tired from a long day's work. "I have something to tell you," she said, her heart hammering with a mixture of excitement and nervousness. "That sounds serious." He pulled back slightly to look at her face. "Should I be worried?" "No, not worried. At least I hope not." She took a deep breath. "I'm going to have a baby." "We're going to have a baby. In the spring, probably March or April." For a moment, Zachary simply stared at her, his expression unreadable. Then his face broke into the widest smile she had ever seen, and he let out a whoop of joy that startled the horses in the nearby corral. He scooped her up, spinning her around despite her laughing protests, then set her down carefully as if she were made of glass. "We're having a baby," he repeated, wonder in his voice. "Brenna, we're having a baby. We are." She touched his face, tracing the line of his jaw. "Are you happy?" "Happy doesn't even begin to cover it. I'm ecstatic. I'm terrified. I'm grateful. I'm all of it at once." He placed his hand gently on her still flat stomach. "Our child. A family. Brenna, you've given me everything I ever wanted and so much more than I knew to dream of." They held each other as the sun sank below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and purple. Brenna felt a peace settle over her, deep and complete. This was what it meant to be loved, to be chosen, to matter. Not invisible, not insignificant, but essential. The center of someone's world, just as he was the center of hers. The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the fall and into early winter. Brenna continued her work around the ranch, though Zachary became increasingly protective, insisting she rest more and let him handle the heavier tasks. She didn't mind. She was tired more often now, and there was something sweet about the way he fussed over her, making sure she ate enough, keeping the house warm, rubbing her aching feet in the evenings. The first anniversary of their meeting came in December, marked by another blizzard that swept down from the north and blanketed their land in white. But this winter was different from the last. This winter, Brenna was warm and safe in her own home, with her husband beside her and their child growing beneath her heart. This winter, she was not invisible but seen, loved, cherished. "You remember last year?" Zachary asked one evening as they sat by the fire, Brenna knitting tiny garments for the baby and Zachary mending a harness. "The storm that lasted 3 days. I came into Peterson's store and saw you behind the counter, and I just knew you were going to change my life. I thought you were just being kind, paying attention to the lonely store clerk out of obligation or pity. I was never kind out of obligation. I was kind because I couldn't help myself. Because even then, you were the only one I saw. In a crowded room or an empty store, my eyes always found you." He set aside his work and moved to kneel beside her chair, placing his hand over hers where it rested on her rounded belly. "And now look at us. A home, a ranch, a baby on the way. We built this, Brenna, together." "Together," she agreed, leaning down to kiss him. "I love you, Zachary Kane." Thank you for seeing me. Thank you for letting me, for taking a chance on a cowboy with more dreams than sense. I think you have plenty of sense, and I think your dreams are coming true." Christmas came and went, celebrated quietly with just the two of them and a small tree Zachary cut from their own land. They exchanged simple gifts: a new saddle blanket she had woven for him, a rocking chair he had built for her. They attended Christmas service in Kennewick, and Brenna noted the way people greeted them warmly, including them in conversations and invitations. She was no longer an outsider, no longer the pitied orphan. She was Mrs. Kane, the rancher's wife, a respected member of the community. January and February passed in a blur of preparation. Brenna sewed and washed and organized, preparing clothes and blankets for the baby. Zachary repaired the cradle that had belonged to his own mother, one of the few possessions he had kept from his childhood. They talked endlessly about names, about whether they hoped for a boy or girl, about what kind of parents they wanted to be. "I want our children to always know they're loved," Brenna said one evening. "I want them to never doubt that they matter, that they're seen and valued and precious." "They will know," Zachary promised, "because they'll see how much I love their mother. They'll grow up watching us, and they'll understand what real love looks like." The baby came on a warm day in late March, arriving earlier than expected but healthy and strong. Dr. Morrison came from town, and Mrs. Henderson stayed to help with the delivery. It was long and difficult, and there were moments when Brenna was sure she couldn't continue. But Zachary never left her side, holding her hand, whispering encouragement, refusing to be sent away despite the doctor's suggestions that he might be more comfortable elsewhere. When their son finally entered the world, his indignant cries filling the room, Brenna wept with relief and joy. Zachary cut the cord with shaking hands, then held the baby while the doctor and Mrs. Henderson tended to Brenna. She watched through exhausted eyes as her husband gazed down at their child with an expression of such fierce love and protectiveness that it made her heart ache. "He's perfect," Zachary breathed, bringing the baby to Brenna and placing him gently in her arms. "Look what we made. Look at our son." The baby had dark hair like his father and blue eyes that would probably change color in the coming weeks. His tiny fingers wrapped around Brenna's thumb, holding on with surprising strength, and she felt a surge of love so powerful it was almost frightening. "Hello, little one," she whispered. "Welcome to the world. We've been waiting for you." They named him Matthew, after Zachary's mother, whose middle name had been Mattia. Matthew Zachary Kane, the first child born in their new home, the beginning of the family they would build together. In the days and weeks that followed, Brenna discovered reserves of strength she hadn't known she possessed. Caring for an infant was exhausting, demanding, and occasionally overwhelming, but it was also filled with moments of breathtaking beauty. Matthew's first smile, the way he turned his head at the sound of his father's voice, the peace of holding him while he slept. Zachary was a devoted father, rising in the night to bring Matthew to Brenna for feeding, changing diapers without complaint, pacing the floor with their son when he was fussy. He continued his work on the ranch, but he never let it take priority over his family. Often, Brenna would look up from her work to see him watching her and Matthew with that same expression of wonder and gratitude, as if he still couldn't quite believe his good fortune. Spring gave way to summer, and summer to fall. Matthew grew strong and healthy, learning to hold up his head, to laugh, to reach for objects that caught his attention. The ranch prospered, the herd growing, neighboring ranchers beginning to seek out Zachary's advice on cattle breeding and land management. Money was still tight, but they had enough, and more importantly, they had each other. On a cool October evening, with Matthew sleeping peacefully in his cradle, and the year's work winding down, Brenna and Zachary sat on their porch watching the stars emerge. She was nestled against his side, his arm around her shoulders, both of them content in the comfortable silence that came from knowing each other deeply. "You remember what you said to me that first night?" Brenna asked. "After you walked me home through the blizzard." "I said a lot of things that night. My heart was beating so hard I was afraid you'd hear it. You said I was the only one you saw every day, even when you weren't in town. You said you thought about me when you should have been thinking about work. All true. Still true, actually. You're still the first thing I think about when I wake up and the last thing before I fall asleep." Brenna tilted her head up to look at him, studying his face in the starlight. He was older now, approaching 27, with lines beginning to form around his eyes from squinting in the sun. His hands were more calloused, his shoulders broader from the hard work of building their life. But his eyes were the same, that stormy gray that had captured her attention from the first moment, full of warmth and love and steadfast devotion. "I used to think winter made me invisible," she said softly. "I thought the cold made me disappear, that people looked through me because I was nobody, nothing. But you saw me. You always saw me. Because you were never invisible, Brenna. You were just surrounded by people too blind to recognize what was right in front of them. But I saw you, and I'll never stop seeing you. Not in winter, not in summer, not in any season. You're the love of my life, the mother of my child, my partner in everything that matters. You're everything." She kissed him then, pouring all her love and gratitude into the gesture. When they finally pulled apart, both breathless, she rested her forehead against his. "Thank you," she whispered. "For what?" "For being stubborn enough to come into that store every week. For walking me home in the blizzard. For asking me to marry you. For building this life with me. For seeing me when I couldn't see myself. Thank you for saying yes. For taking a chance on a cowboy with a dream. For making that dream better than anything I could have imagined alone." He kissed her forehead, then her nose, then her lips again, gentle and sweet. "I love you, Brenna Kane. Today, tomorrow, and all the days after that. I love you too." Inside the house, Matthew stirred and let out a small cry. Brenna started to rise, but Zachary gently pushed her back down. "I'll get him. You stay here and enjoy the peace for a few more minutes." She watched him go inside, heard his low voice talking to their son, and smiled. This was her life now. Not lonely, not invisible, not merely surviving. This was living, truly living, surrounded by love and purpose and belonging. The winter that had once seemed so bleak had led her to the greatest spring of her life, and she would never take it for granted. The years that followed brought both challenges and triumphs. A drought in their second year tested their resources and their resolve, but they weathered it together, selling off some cattle to make ends meet and rebuilding when the rains finally came. A hard winter in their third year claimed several animals and damaged the barn, but the community rallied around them, neighbors helping with repairs and offering feed to tide them over. Through it all, their love remained constant, the foundation on which everything else was built. They argued sometimes, as all couples do, about money or decisions or the 100 small stresses of ranch life. But they always came back to each other, always remembered what mattered most, always chose to work through rather than walk away. Matthew grew into a bright, energetic toddler, then a curious child, full of questions about everything he saw. He followed Zachary around the ranch, mimicking his father's walk and mannerisms, learning the work even as he played. Brenna taught him his letters and numbers, read to him from the books they bought on rare trips to town, instilled in him a love of learning that complemented the practical skills he absorbed from ranch life. When Matthew was 3, Brenna became pregnant again. This time, she knew what to expect, and the pregnancy felt easier, more familiar. Their daughter was born in December, in the middle of a snowstorm that reminded Brenna so much of that first blizzard when everything had changed. They named her Sarah, after Zachary's mother, and she had her mother's features and her father's storm-gray eyes. With 2 children and a thriving ranch, their lives were full to bursting. There were days when Brenna fell into bed exhausted, barely able to keep her eyes open long enough to kiss Zachary goodnight. But there were also days of profound joy. Watching Matthew teach Sarah to walk, seeing Zachary's face light up when he came in from a long day's work to find his family waiting, sitting on the porch on summer evenings with her children playing in the yard and her husband's hand warm in hers. The ranch continued to grow. By their 5th anniversary, they had tripled their herd and bought an additional 50 acres. Zachary hired 2 ranch hands, young men eager to learn the trade, and began to mentor them the way Mr. Kimball had once mentored him. Brenna started selling her baked goods and preserves in town, her reputation for quality spreading until she could barely keep up with demand. They became pillars of the community, the couple that had started with nothing and built something solid through hard work and devotion. Young people courting would sometimes ask their advice, and Zachary and Brenna would exchange amused glances before sharing the wisdom they had earned through experience. "Love is work," Zachary would say. "It's choosing each other every single day, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard." "Love is seeing each other truly," Brenna would add. "Not the person you wish they were or the person they might become, but who they actually are, and choosing to cherish that person." On their 10th anniversary, Zachary arranged for the children to stay with the Hendersons overnight, a rare gift of time alone. He took Brenna back to the spot where he had first shown her the land, where he had outlined his dreams for the future. They stood together looking at what they had built. The house, now expanded to 6 rooms to accommodate their growing family and occasional guests. The barn, large and sturdy, housing not just cattle but horses and chickens and the farm equipment that made their work possible. The pastures, green and thriving, dotted with cattle bearing their brand. The garden, bursting with vegetables and flowers that Brenna tended with loving care. "What do you think?" Zachary asked, echoing his question from that long-ago day. "Did it turn out the way you imagined?" "It's better," Brenna said honestly. "So much better. I couldn't have imagined this, Zachary. I couldn't have dreamed big enough to encompass all of this. Neither could I. Every dream I had, you made it better just by being part of it." He pulled her close, resting his chin on the top of her head. "I know it hasn't always been easy. I know there have been hard times, scary times, times when you probably wondered if we'd make it. But we always did make it. We always will as long as we're together. I believe that. I believe we can face anything as long as we have each other." He pulled back slightly, looking into her eyes with that intensity that still made her heart skip. "I love you more now than I did 10 years ago, and I loved you impossibly much even then. Every year, every day, you give me more reasons to fall deeper. I feel the same way." She reached up to touch his face, memorizing the features she knew so well, the face that had first seen her when she felt invisible. "You changed my life, Zachary Kane. You made me believe I was worthy of love, worthy of happiness, worthy of being seen. And you've spent every day since proving that belief was justified." He kissed her then, a long, slow, thorough kiss that reminded her of their wedding night, of all the passion and promise that still burned between them. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, he took her hand and led her back to the house, to the bedroom they shared, to the bed where they had loved each other through a decade of nights. They made love with the unhurried intensity of long familiarity, knowing exactly how to touch, how to move, how to please each other. Afterward, tangled together under the quilts, they talked softly about their children, their hopes for the future, their gratitude for the present. "Do you ever think about that first winter?" Brenna asked. "About how different everything was, sometimes. I think about seeing you through the store window, watching you work, trying to find excuses to come to town more often. I think about the blizzard, about walking you home, about the moment I decided to stop being cautious and just tell you how I felt. I'm glad you did. I'm glad you were brave enough for both of us. You were brave too. You said yes when you could have said no. You trusted me when you had every reason to be cautious. You took a leap of faith, Brenna, and I've spent every day trying to prove you didn't leap in vain. You've proven it 1,000 times over." She kissed his shoulder, then settled more comfortably against his side. "I used to think winter made me invisible. But that winter brought me you, and you taught me that I was never invisible at all. I just needed the right person to see me." "You're the only one I see," he said, repeating the words he had spoken so long ago, words that had become a promise between them. "Every day, in every season, you're the only one I see." They fell asleep like that, wrapped in each other's arms, content in the life they had built and the love they had nurtured. Outside, the stars wheeled overhead, and the wind whispered through the pines, and somewhere in the distance, an owl called to its mate. The ranch slept, peaceful and secure, a testament to what two people could build when they chose each other, saw each other, loved each other without reservation. The children grew. Matthew became a serious, responsible boy who loved the ranch and already talked about running it someday. Sarah was bright and spirited, curious about everything, filling the house with laughter and questions. When Matthew was 8 and Sarah 5, Brenna discovered she was pregnant again, a surprise that delighted and exhausted her in equal measure. Their third child, a boy they named Daniel, was born on a bright summer day, arriving quickly and with far less drama than his siblings. He had his mother's brown eyes and his father's dark hair, and from the beginning, he was the most easygoing of the 3 children, content to observe and smile and charm everyone he met. With 3 children, the house felt smaller, livelier, fuller of noise and love and controlled chaos. Zachary built an addition, adding 2 more bedrooms and expanding the kitchen. Brenna taught the older children to help with chores, instilling in them the same work ethic that had carried her through her hardest years. The ranch required more of Zachary's time, but he always made sure to be present for the important moments. Matthew's first successful ride alone, Sarah's first day of school in town, Daniel's first steps. By the time Daniel was 3, the ranch was firmly established as one of the most successful operations in the region. Zachary had earned a reputation for fairness and skill, and young men came from miles around hoping to work for him. Brenna's preserves and baked goods were sold in stores throughout the territory, providing a steady secondary income that gave them financial security. But more than the success, more than the money or the reputation, what mattered was the family they had built. The children grew up knowing they were loved, seeing every day what commitment and partnership looked like. They saw their parents work side by side, saw them laugh together, saw them navigate disagreements with respect and care. They saw their father look at their mother as if she were the most precious thing in the world, and they saw their mother return that look with equal devotion. One winter evening, when the children were 14, 11, and 8, the family gathered in the sitting room after dinner. A fire crackled in the hearth, and snow fell softly outside the windows. Matthew was reading, Sarah was drawing, and Daniel was building an elaborate structure with wooden blocks. Zachary and Brenna sat together on the sofa, her head resting on his shoulder, both of them simply enjoying the peaceful domesticity of the moment. "How did you and Father meet?" Sarah asked suddenly, looking up from her drawing. "You've never really told us the whole story." Brenna and Zachary exchanged glances, and she saw the same memories reflected in his eyes that were playing through her own mind. "We met during a blizzard," Zachary began, his arm tightening around Brenna's shoulders. "I came into the store where your mother worked and the storm hit while I was there. I walked her home and that's when I knew." "Knew what?" Daniel asked, abandoning his blocks to climb onto his father's lap. "That she was special. That she was the person I'd been waiting for my whole life without knowing I was waiting." He pressed a kiss to Brenna's temple. "Your mother thought she was invisible, that people didn't see her, but I saw her. I saw her strength and her kindness and her beauty, and I knew I wanted to spend the rest of my life making sure she never felt invisible again." "That's romantic," Sarah said, a dreamy expression on her face. "It's also true," Brenna added. "Your father saw me when I couldn't see myself. He believed in me when I didn't believe in myself. He chose me when I thought no one would ever choose me. And then we built this life together, this family, this home. Everything good in my life started with that blizzard, and your father's courage to tell me how he felt." "I want someone to see me like that someday," Sarah said softly. "You will," Zachary assured her. "And when that person comes along, you'll know, because they'll see the real you, not some version they want you to be. They'll see your strength and your spirit and your incredible heart, and they'll count themselves lucky to have found you. Just like I counted myself lucky to find your mother. Just like I still count myself lucky every single day." The children seemed satisfied with the story, returning to their activities with the easy acceptance of youth. But Brenna remained nestled against Zachary's side, thinking about the journey that had brought them to this moment. From that first snowy evening to this cozy family scene, every step had been worth it. Every challenge, every doubt, every moment of fear had been part of the path that led them here. "I love our life," she whispered to Zachary, quiet enough that the children wouldn't hear. "I love everything we've built together. So do I, and I love you more every day." They stayed like that for hours, the whole family together, warm and safe while the winter storm raged outside. This was what it meant to be home, Brenna thought. Not a building or a place, but the people you loved, the life you had chosen, the commitment you renewed every single day. The years continued to unfold, bringing the natural progression of life. The children grew into young adults with dreams and plans of their own. Matthew, as expected, chose to stay on the ranch, working beside his father and learning the business he would one day inherit. Sarah, surprising everyone, decided to become a teacher, attending normal school in Seattle and returning to establish a school in Kennewick. Daniel, the baby, proved to have a talent for animal husbandry, specializing in horse breeding and training. Brenna and Zachary grew older together, silver threading through their hair, lines deepening around their eyes and mouths. But age only seemed to deepen their connection. They had weathered so much together, the challenges of building a ranch from nothing, the exhaustion of raising 3 children, the normal ups and downs of any long marriage. Through it all, they had chosen each other, seen each other, loved each other. On their 25th anniversary, the children organized a celebration, inviting friends and neighbors to the ranch for a party that lasted all day and into the evening. People came from throughout the region, testament to the respect and affection Brenna and Zachary had earned over the years. There were speeches and toasts, laughter and music, an abundance of food and fellowship. As the sun set and the party began to wind down, Zachary found Brenna standing at the edge of the crowd, watching everything with a contented smile. He came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist and pulling her back against his chest, just as he had done countless times over the years. "Happy anniversary, my love," he murmured into her ear. "Happy anniversary." She covered his hands with hers, intertwining their fingers. 25 years. Can you believe it? Sometimes yes, sometimes no. Sometimes it feels like we've been together forever. Other times, I look at you and I'm that nervous young cowboy again, trying to work up the courage to tell you how I feel. She turned in his arms to face him, reaching up to touch his face with gentle fingers. His hair was more gray than dark now, his face more weathered, but his eyes were the same. Those storm gray eyes that had first seen her, first known her, first loved her. "You're still the only one I see," he said, echoing those long-ago words one more time. "In a crowd or alone, young or old, you're the only one I see, Brenna. You always have been and you always will be." Tears gathered in her eyes, happy tears for once, tears of gratitude and joy and profound contentment. "And you're the one who taught me I was never invisible. You're the one who saw me, who chose me, who loved me into becoming the person I am today. Everything I am, everything we've built, it all started with you." He kissed her then in front of all their guests, a kiss that was both chaste and passionate, honoring both their long history and the attraction that still sparked between them. When they broke apart, applause and cheers erupted from the crowd, but Brenna barely heard them. She was too focused on Zachary's face, on the love and pride shining in his eyes, on the quiet certainty that they would continue loving each other like this for the rest of their days. The party continued around them, but they stayed in their small bubble, swaying slightly to music only they could hear, content in each other's arms. Their children were dancing with friends and suitors. Their ranch hands were sharing stories by the bonfire. Their neighbors were helping themselves to more food and drink. It was everything they had ever hoped for and more. As full darkness fell and the stars emerged overhead, Brenna looked up at the sky and thought about that girl she had been so long ago, the one who believed winter made her invisible. She thought about the long, lonely years before Zachary, and then about the rich, full years since. She thought about the journey from that small room above the saloon to this thriving ranch filled with love and life and laughter. "What are you thinking about?" Zachary asked, following her gaze to the stars. "About how far we've come. About how different my life is from what I ever imagined. About how grateful I am that you walked into Peterson's store on that snowy day and saw me. I'll always see you, no matter what. You're the only one, Brenna. You always have been and you always will be." She smiled and pulled him closer, content to stand there under the stars with the man who had changed her life simply by choosing to see her. The party continued around them. Their children were happy and thriving. Their ranch was prosperous and secure. But more than all of that, they had each other. And they had the love they had nurtured through 25 years of seasons, through winters and springs and summers and falls. The invisible girl had become a visible woman, loved and cherished and seen every day by the man who mattered most. The cowboy with dreams had built a life beyond anything he had imagined, made richer by the woman who shared every step of the journey. Together, they had created something beautiful and lasting, something that would continue long after they were gone in the children and grandchildren who would carry their legacy forward. As the night deepened and the celebration finally wound to a close, Brenna and Zachary walked hand in hand back to their house, leaving their guests to find their own ways home or to the accommodations that had been prepared. Inside, the house was quiet and familiar, filled with the accumulated memories of 25 years of marriage and family life. They climbed the stairs to their bedroom, helping each other out of their party clothes with the easy intimacy of long familiarity. They climbed into bed, and Brenna settled into her usual position with her head on Zachary's chest, his arm around her shoulders, their legs tangled together. "I love you," she whispered into the darkness. "Thank you for 25 wonderful years. I love you too. And thank you for saying yes all those years ago, for taking a chance on me, for building this life with me." He pressed a kiss to the top of her head. "Here's to 25 more. And 25 after that," Brenna added, knowing it was unlikely but loving the sentiment anyway. "And forever beyond that," Zachary finished. "Because what we have doesn't end when we do. It continues in Matthew and Sarah and Daniel. It continues in the grandchildren we'll have someday. It continues in the land we've nurtured and the community we've been part of. We've built something that will last, Brenna. Something real and true and good." She held him tighter, feeling the solid warmth of him, hearing the steady beat of his heart. He was right. They had built something lasting, something that transcended the individual lives they had lived. They had built a family, a legacy, a love story that would be told and retold by generations to come. And it had all started with a blizzard, a cowboy brave enough to speak his heart, and a woman who learned she was never invisible at all. She had simply been waiting for the right person to see her, and when he came, everything changed. As sleep claimed her, Brenna smiled, grateful beyond measure for every moment, every challenge, every joy that had brought them to this point. Life with Zachary Kane had been everything she never dared to dream of, and she knew without doubt that she would choose it all over again, exactly as it had happened, if given the chance. In the darkness, Zachary held his wife close and thought similar thoughts. He had spent his youth chasing dreams of success and prosperity, and he had achieved those dreams. But his real success, his true prosperity, lay sleeping in his arms. Brenna had been his greatest adventure, his deepest joy, his most profound blessing. And he thanked whatever force had led him into that store on a snowy day long ago, whatever instinct had prompted him to speak his heart, whatever grace had allowed him to spend his life with this remarkable woman. They slept peacefully, wrapped in each other's arms, two people who had found in each other exactly what they needed, exactly when they needed it. The ranch slept around them, the children in their rooms dreaming their own dreams, the cattle peaceful in the pastures, the land resting under the starlight. Everything was as it should be, as it had been built to be through years of hard work and abiding love. The story that had begun with winter's cold embrace had blossomed into a life full of warmth and light and love. The girl who thought she was invisible had become the center of someone's world, had built a family and a legacy that would endure. The cowboy who said, "You're the only one I see," had proven those words true every single day for 25 years and counting. And as the stars wheeled overhead and the night deepened into the hours before dawn, Brenna and Zachary slept on, content in their love, grateful for their journey, secure in the knowledge that what they had built together would stand the test of time. Their story had a happy ending, not because everything was always perfect, but because they had chosen each other every single day, through every season, in every circumstance. They had seen each other, truly seen each other, and that seeing had transformed both of their lives into something beautiful and lasting and true. The end of their story was really just another beginning, another chapter in the ongoing saga of two people who loved each other well and built a life that honored that love. And that, in the end, was the greatest success of all.